presentation, that's like one basic principle, is it has to tell one story. The illustration you see here is a American Native American statue called a storyteller. So when you are giving a presentation, you need to tell a story, and it has to be one story. How do we practice for that? Like, how do you know you have one story? Does anyone have any ideas, like how to decide before you have your presentation that you are ready to actually start making your presentation, that the story in your mind is now well crystallized, that you can actually start developing your presentation? Any ideas from the audience?
I think I should have the starting point, my thesis, and maybe a result that concludes the initial point.
But your results, this is a good answer, but your results may have very different components to it. How do you know that you have like one story to tell?
Maybe the objective of the presentation should be clear first.
How do you know your objective is clear? We're getting there.
Maybe who you are presenting to, where you're presenting.
Yeah, so that's something that you have to consider, but it's very important to think about the title of your presentation. So like, I didn't know who was talking, maybe it was Luigi, but you have to have some sort of a title, some sort of a subject, but think about your title early on, because it kind of helps you decide on the story. And then what is very important is to be able to talk about your presentation in a few minutes. This is something called elevator pitch, that, in an elevator, if someone asks, so what is your thesis about? Or what is your presentation today about? You can tell in a few minutes what is the essence of what you are actually presenting. So this is important. And what is important to give a good presentation, this is obviously just my idea, is to stay focused on really one main takeaway, not to try to present everything, for example, that you have done in your thesis. This sounds very trivial, but it's actually very, very important. What is very important also is that you follow a logical flow. Maintaining a logical flow through your presentation is super important, and it's difficult. So making this is very difficult. A tip I want to give you today, like some sort of a practice that you can try, see if it works for you or not. We do kind of similar thing for writing. So you make some sort of a skeleton for your presentation. What does that mean? That means that you try to decide, okay, you have, let's say, 20 minutes, how many slides you want to have, and then try to imagine that each slide has one title. Write the title in sentences and put them all together in one paragraph. When you put this together, read this to yourself. One of my students emphasizes that the best that it works for him is to read to himself loud. So maybe that works for you too. And then try to revise it until this paragraph of sentences, they're telling you the story. Then you take these sentences and you turn them to the titles of different slides. And this way, you can almost ensure that you have a logical flow in your presentation. So just try it. This is a method that I think a lot of times works pretty well. Question about that? Any questions so far? Looks like no. But how do you decide on this flow? So we said, okay, you put things together, but how would you logically flow the sentences, especially if this is your first time? So something that you can borrow from acting is that basically you start with some introduction, exposition. You introduce the big picture, but together with the knowledge gaps. So what is important is to tell people not just the knowledge gap, but why you are doing this research. For that, you really need to set a context and give the knowledge gaps that you have realized from your literature review. And then you are going to say how the method what method you are using and how is this actually addressing this knowledge gap. Now we are going to talk a lot about how you build those slides, but for now, I just have this idea. If you have results, normally you want to show the main findings. That would be the climax of your presentation, where you want all the attention go. And afterwards, you show some other supporting results, but make sure that that main finding, main takeaway is very emphasized. Afterwards, you can show some other results, allude to the limitations that you may have. And then what is very important, and a lot of times is missed, is this last part, resolution, where you go back and you take the conclusion of your study and relate it back to what you actually motivated your presentation with. So you want to show how your results are actually addressing that problem, that knowledge gap, that main story that you started your presentation with. So it is kind of going up and back down again. Some people call it a V-shaped. You can call it a pyramid, however you like. So this going back up and then going back down works in a lot of scenarios. So you start with the title. We said that the title is very, very important, right? You need to think about the title beforehand. You want to have a title which is focused, which is signaling that you are only talking about one story. You want it to be informative, but at the same time, it has to be short. And if you can, make it catchy, that it reminds people of, something else that maybe they are familiar with. So we are looking at here two examples. So look at the one on the left-hand side. An overview of various project management techniques and their impact on productivity levels in the modern workspace. This is very long. It's really convoluted. It's hard to understand what exactly they have done. And the second title is a revised version, The Fast Way to Streamline Project Management and Enhance Productivity. So that title is the same, but it's telling a lot more, it's giving a lot more clear message. One thing which is important, again, I emphasize, is deciding on this title early, because it will help you realize what a story you have to tell. So this is important. So when you have your title, what was the next thing you want to work on? What's the first part of your presentation? Does anyone remember? Just to make sure that I have everyone with me. You have the title slide then. Is everyone still there? Because I only see my screen.
Yes, I think everybody is hearing you.
Okay.
Who can answer?
Sorry, maybe the table of contents.
Oh, that's a good one. We'll talk about that. Yes and no. Yes, I think that's a part of the context and introduction of the presentation. A little later, we'll talk about exactly that particular slide. But yes, a good one. What is next?
I have another, a graphical illustration of summarization of the project.
Well, that should be kind of at the end, right? Maybe I don't understand what you mean by summarization, but when you start your presentation now, besides the content, which we are going to talk about, I think it's very important when you think about the presentation to think about giving the context. Starting the presentation with an important context that makes the audience interested in that topic and makes them realize why your work is important. And remember, first you have to establish this why, that people stay with you and want to listen to your presentation. So why are you doing this research? And when you do that, it's not enough just to show, you know, here is a building and we are monitoring the health of the building. It's important to establish why, if, for example, you are not doing health monitoring of a bridge, what consequences it may have. Your presentation may start with a recent example of a bridge collapse due to ignorance in terms of a structural health monitoring. That would be a lot more impactful than just, you know, showing just showing some, you know, random pictures of a bridge. So think about setting the context and focusing on knowledge gaps. Even if you are showing the big picture, it's important to show from the beginning, like, what are the main knowledge gaps and what is the exact knowledge gap that you are addressing with your research. So think about the knowledge gaps as at the same time as the big picture, like what is missing in the literature. So this is important. And then you want to talk about your research, the method that you are using, and how it's going to address this particular knowledge gap. So this is kind of the next thing that you want to talk about. Afterwards, you go a little bit more details into the approach. You say what exactly you want to do and you justify it. It's important, whatever you do, you say why you are doing this, what you have done, and how you are actually achieving what you wanted to do. So it's important to have this kind of a structure in mind. So that would be the approach. They have the same color because the objective and approach are the same. What comes next, do you think? Now we gave the big picture, we have a title, we said what we want to do, we have been talking about methods, and then?
The result.
Yeah, then we talk about the results. You show the main findings. Remember that you have to think about what you want the audience to take away with them. And then you can supplement that with some other additional results, talk about limitations, and obviously you have a conclusion. So when you think about the logical flow, this is not necessarily the slides that you want to have, but when we talk about the logical flow is kind of this flow that you go from title to big picture, talk about your motivations, talk about the objectives, approach, findings, and then go back to conclusion. And most importantly, at the end, look back and explain how your results are actually addressing the problem that you introduced in the beginning of your presentation. So, obviously, when you are making a presentation, it's very important to have good slides. So because the way your slides are, it really influences how people are listening to you and how much they are going to take away from your presentation. So we are going to talk about the slide design. So now you have the skeleton, you decide on a flow. For every slide, you come up with some sort of a title, you put it all together, and now you want to design your slides. How would we do that? This is how PowerPoint, normally if you use the PowerPoint for presentation, a lot of us use that. This is how the slides are. And you can see that there is little change since 1990s. So you have a title and you have the hierarchy of headings. The method that I'm advocating really says PowerPoint slides are not working. This is not how you should design your slides. They encourage using a lot of words. Like someone talked about table of content. Like a lot of people start with a point overview, with point different points for different topics. A lot of the space is unused. The slides are, it encourages you to have like a word titles. So in any case, if you follow PowerPoint, your title slide may look like something like that, right? A lot of us have had the slides with a title like that. You have the title, you have the authors, you have the date, but is this very catchy? Is this informative or not? So the idea is no. We think if you start with a title slide like that, a lot of people may not be very interested in watching your presentation. So what's the alternative? Does anyone have any ideas? What can we do to make this better?
To put some images.
Who said to put some images? Is that what I heard correctly?
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, exactly that. Not any image, an image which relates to what you are presenting. Preferably something more general or something that attracts attention, right? If you're like me, you like mountains. In this particular case, it's nice to show a picture like that, and then this has a little animation where it's showing an event, and this just, you have the same title, you have the authors, you have the date. Instead of, you also have the logos of the university, but choosing a nice illustrations which summarizes your presentation or gives some information or motivation to your work is a game changer. When I gave this presentation maybe a month ago to my colleagues at Gustav Eiffel, someone said, well, a lot of times the conference or the meeting, they give us a template. I personally don't like that, but okay, there is a way around it. Even if you have a template, use the template, have a title slide with the template, and the moment you want to start your presentation, click on it, so it goes to the next slide, which is your own personalized title slide. So this way you have respected the conference or meeting rules, but you also are showing your title slide. So you will have 2 title slides. That's fine. You can do that. And then you have this nice title slide, which would actually attract people to your presentation, makes them want to see what is next. And we talked about, someone talked about table of content, and I cannot really see anyone or their hands up, but I think a lot of us have seen or have made outlines which look like that. Is that right? At least I started making presentation with this outline. So this new method is saying, no, this kind of list is not really doing you any good, because people would forget this, what you are listing. This is probably helpful for you, but it's not really helpful for the people that you're looking. And a lot of times, the headings are introduction, background, conclusion. These are very generic headings. They don't carry any information. So what's the alternative? The alternative could be something like that. So if you have, let's say, you are going to talk about, in this case, 3 different things, you can start, you can have a visual content slide where, let's say in this case, you have everything grayed out, and one by one, you change the black and white to color, you add a title, and this is how you introduce these different topics that you have in your presentation. So instead of having something which says overview, notice that the title of this slide is not overview. So going back, this is what you normally get, outline or overview. Here, the title is still a complete sentence, which is leading you to see what this talk is actually focused on. So it's kind of think about it as a more an elongated, expanded version of the title of your presentation, right? Any question about that?
Is it necessary to have this outline slide at all?
I'm sorry?
Is it necessary to have an outline slide generally?
If it depends on your presentation. If you only have really one thing to talk about, maybe not. You can get away without it. But sometimes your talk is this natural, for example, you did numerical study and experimental study, right? In the beginning, you may want to lead the audience that they know that you have done different things. And in those situations, it's a good organization. If you are only having like a 10-minute talk in a very fast kind of a presentation, maybe not. This is a good question. So you have to use your own judgment. But if you need to have this kind of a slide, basically, you may want to replace it with this kind of a slide. Okay? And then you come to the main slides, right? Now you have your title slide. You are giving a more detailed version of that in the content. And then you are coming to the meat of your presentation. Remember, starting with the big picture, establishing the knowledge gaps, and then talking about your methods and your results. So this method advocates that every single slide could be an assertion evidence slide. So this is a structure. What is assertion evidence? So you assert something, you say something, and you support it by an evidence, which has to be some sort of a plot, illustration, formula, but you do it such that this assertion and evidence, they correspond to each other. So what is very important is that you organize your presentation around these messages, and these messages should be really the title. So avoiding having like a words as titles, but having sentences instead. These sentences don't need to be like the sentences in your papers. They can be simpler. You may be able to get away with not following all grammatical rules. You don't have to have points at the end, for example, but sentences. And they say 1 or maximum 2 lines, like not having long sentences. So example that I showed you in the beginning, and you see here, you see the title, it's almost 2 lines. And the results are these thermography images, and it clearly relates to that particular topic. The slide is giving you one message, and this message is in the title, it's in the illustrations, they don't contradict each other. It's very clear, and in the 30 seconds that people have time to consume this information, they can get it. This is another example. So you see the title is saying, the way a dog sniffs does not contaminate the vapor stream from the sensors. You see a picture from a research. You see a schematic of a dog. You see the way it's being, so the title now yellow, if you look, now the illustration really matches exactly what is said in the title. So you are not just showing, what you have done. You try to organize your slides based on messages, findings from your study, not just what you have done just in a chronological order. Another example, you see here, you are comparing two types of headlights, and you see that one is illuminating better than the other. The pictures are telling the story. So the first step is really to write these sentence headlines. And this is something that takes time. and it takes some iterations. So remember this skeleton that I talked to you about in the beginning. Basically, you have to write and decide on these titles to have some sort of a draft before you start your presentation. So you think about, okay, here I have this message, and I make a slide for that particular message. So making these headlines, these titles is very important. And I can't emphasize this more. You don't want to have, like, I have seen a lot of times, like the result is, it's written, the title is results. And then sometimes it's results 1 out of 3, and then 2 out of 3, 3 out of 3, or results continue. I've done this before. No. So you think about what are you showing, and you make it a sentence, and then you organize your results such that it matches what you are saying, what you are asserting. Any questions? Because this is very, very important. Hi, Damiana. Sure. Mm-hmm. That's a good question. So when you have your research, you have some figures related to your research, right? So you have some figures from your research where normally you use it to write an article or to make a presentation, and those figures are giving some messages, right? So you have those figures from your research, which will help you decide on, what are the main findings, what the titles are. But I want to say that, Damiano, that figure may not be exactly what you want to do in your presentation. So maybe that inspires a title or a slide, but then once you write the title, try to think, how can you best present that idea, that finding, with the figures that you have? Maybe you need to make some changes to that figure. A simple way, for example, maybe you should show the plots one after the other. Maybe not exactly the same figure comes normally in your presentation. You may have to do some, or you may add some schematic to it. For example, you saw the dog, right? I'm sure that the research figure was the dog, the picture, because that's where they had basically figured out how the dog is sniffing, etc. But then they also made a schematic to make that very clear for when you just look at it. If you just looked at that picture, you wouldn't know what it is. So it's kind of a little bit of an iterative procedure. Did I answer your question? Yeah. What is important is that they correspond to each other. So a lot of times you see, like, people are talking about something, but they're not showing anything about that in their slides. And that's hard to follow. Or sometimes they are showing some figures, but it's not really clear what is coming out of those. So yeah, it's this correspondence, and it's an iterative procedure. This is another example. So if you look at the title, a succession of electron acceptors occur when an aquifer becomes contaminated with oil. You look at the picture, you see oil, you see these electrons. Well, this is not my field, I don't know, but kind of you see something seems to be progressing with flow. It's matching. This is easier said than done. It takes time to make these slides, but then it's worth it. It will be rewarded. Like, people will react to that. This is an example. It's like before and after. This is like a normal slide, right? Digital acquisition system sampling. And you see, like, you have vibration measured by accelerometer, analog signal converted to digital signal. This is fortunately related to what we all work on, right? Signal sampled at a specific rate. So the advocation is that, if you can, try to replace that with something more illustrative, something that, people can more easily follow. So this is the same thing. The title, let's go back. here the title of this slide doesn't say anything, right? You agree, you look at it, it's just a digital acquisition system sampling, and then you have a bunch of categories. Here, you change that title to a sentence. A digital acquisition system has to sample at a rate fast enough to retain the shape of the analog signal. So now you understand, okay, so it's about the speed of the sampling, right? And then you see this diagram, which is showing how you have analog, how it's changing to digital. It's showing something. Of course, it's going to be different in your particular slides, but it may take some creativity to go there. But this is a lot more informative than the previous slide. So we have talked about this over and over, but then the first step was the title. The second step is to find this visual evidence. This goes with the question that Demian is asking. Like, you need to know what you want to present. You first have some results, you make a title, then you may have to modify those results, add sketches, do something else to make it really supported by this evidence. This is another example. The computer simulation of an event is an iterative process. And here you see that, they have shown the iteration really nicely. You see the code, you see the equations, the code, then, changing it into the simulation, and then going back and checking and, refining this process. It can be hard, it takes some creativity, but then you have some really nice slides. Another example, the title is "Most streams were classified in fair condition because of high chloride concentration." This is West Virginia, this state. Actually, Pennsylvania is actually in the middle, the one you see on the top. So they're showing this is 48% fair. It's caused by sulfate, but then this is 75%, this is 79%, and these are called by chloride. So they're using a map, they're using animation. So going back to Demian's question, Demian, I'm sorry if I am misspelling. I don't see anyone's name to read over. Okay, sorry. One thing that I want to say is that please just don't think that whatever you did for your paper, you can do more than that, right? If you spend a little bit of time, you can make some sketches, some things that make your presentation better, because it's different when you are writing a paper, you show a figure. If you copy the same figure in your presentation, there are several problems. A lot of times the fonts are too small, they are not going to look good. And most importantly, people don't have all the backgrounds or the things that you have written. So using schematics, using markings, labeling, bringing the plots one after the other, doing a little bit more on your figures can make a difference in how you present your results. I'm sure that these authors don't have this picture in their paper. They have tables and things like that, but they have made it so visual that you immediately see the geographic locations, you immediately see these numbers and chloride versus sulfate in this particular case. This is one of my favorites. This is very nice. So since its construction in 1952, traffic across the bridge, this is seems to be in Maryland, has grown exponentially. So you see that starts with a car in 1952. You see the bridge, and look here, how they have spent time to make this. So now 1961, 2007, so you see the traffic has increased. They're using the number of cars for that, and basically they show how much the traffic has increased just with that. So I go through this again, like I think it's pretty nice, right? This is another example, which is maybe closer to heart for us. You have equations. You want to talk about different components in an experiment. So it's normalized friction factors and Nusselt numbers correlated our data with the data of others, for example. And then you see for each one of them, they're using animation. So first we see the components, then they are not showing everything all at once, all the equations. So you see pressure taps, pressure drop, and then they hide the equation before showing the next equation. So it takes some creativity, but maybe this is something you can try if you have a lot of equations and things like that. One thing that any questions at this point before we move forward? Sure, go ahead. No, I think they can work even in short presentations. Just you have to account for the time, right? So we won't get to the delivery today, but you have to just account for the time. If you have a slide with a lot of animation, it takes much longer to present that than a slide which has no animation. A lot of times, if you want to maintain a sequence like here and maintain this connectivity between different things, animation can work really nice because they present the information and the data one at a time. And that really helps the audience to digest the information. If you showed all the things here at once, it would be a big problem. So, but then this slide takes 2 minutes. So if you have a slide with animation in a 10-minute presentation, it will probably is going to take up like your 2 or 3 slides. So you cannot have 10 slides anymore. You need to have 8, right? Just account for it. I've had students doing 10-minute presentations. We put animations in, and it can work pretty nicely if you need that animation to give your message. So don't worry about that. Just keep your timing. Okay. Okay. I'm going backwards. So as you can see, my colleague Mike Ali is really against PowerPoint defaults. And when you do this kind of presentation, you'll see that you can't really use PowerPoint slides. You have to make your own slide master. I assume everyone has done a version of that at some point, or whatever format that you use if you're using LaTeX. So a lot of times you just use text boxes, basically. So you make your own, you shouldn't use these, and you just use text boxes and you decide on the fonts and things like that. For example, here, like people have used, this is very nice, the illustrations, but people have used the PowerPoint default. So what is wrong with this? Yeah, it's very jammed, right? You see on the top, there is a lot of white space on the top. You see, this is what the PowerPoint does. The title slide, the title is kind of lower, and then the illustrations are fantastic, and you see exactly how things have changed. This is a very nice slide otherwise. So then you can change that. Yes. You can use animation to make this stronger. And then basically my colleague says, I mean, this is a much nicer slide, right? With the same information, he's keeping, basically the animation is a part of this. Let's do this again. So you see before you have this big title, things like that. Here you have the title is on one side. You start with before. That's something maybe I mentioned that because I'm with the students here. When you do animation, the first things in your slide don't need to be animated. So leave those and then show the next thing. This saves time. So you don't have to animate the first things in your slide. So that's just a little tip here. So like you see here, the before and where this is happening, like the Indian Ocean, it's here. And then the animation is just showing the after, which has this effect of you saw the before and you see the after. So it just makes it a nice slide. And then by changing the default, you made the title smaller. The title is not overpowering the presentation like it was before. And then you don't have so much clutter. You use the white space to separate the title from the illustration. So this works much better. Let's go back here. You see, compared to this, this is a much better slide. Okay, and then a lot of times the slides finish with this. I don't see raised hands, but I think if I ask you to raise hand, you know that a lot of people finish their presentations with a slide which says questions or thank you. This method says this is a very bad idea because the last thing that the audience is remembering your presentation with is the last slide. And this last slide is just saying questions or thank you. Is that what you want them to remember? So the suggestion is no. You create a slide which gives really a sense of your presentation, almost like a summary, which is visual. You put a main figure, the main results of your presentation. You can also have like the content slide. You can have separate different things that you have learned in your study. And if you want, you can then have thank you and questions appear small at the bottom of this. So don't end your presentation with questions or thank you, or a picture of your research group. None of these are considered good practice. If you want to show your picture of your research group, it is something that in the title slide you can put a picture of everyone if you wish to do that, but not at the last slide. This is actually my last slide. I thought it's good to start with that, so I can take any questions you have, or we can discuss some of these topics. I don't know. It took a lot less than when I presented in person in Gustav Eiffel, so I thought we would need all 2 hours, but no, 45 minutes or 1 hour, I don't know.
It's fine.
Seems to be good. Okay.
Thank you very much, Parisa.